This week's piece, Sedra's Parshat Teitzei. Teitzei enumerates many, many mitzvahs. But as an introduction, I want to point out that we have all kinds of mitzvahs in the Torah. We have prohibitions, lo saseh. Let's say not to eat meat or food that is not kosher. Not to work on Shabbos. These are prohibitions. And then you have mitzvah saseh, positive commandments. Let's say the mitzvah of davening, the mitzvah of putting on tefillin, the mitzvah of learning Torah. These are mitzvahs that are written in a positive manner and require an act from us. But then you have mitzvahs that are written in a positive manner, but nevertheless, it's a prohibition, even though it's written in a positive manner. For example, the Torah says that a person should give a divorce to his wife, a get to his wife. That doesn't mean that by giving a get to one's wife, one fulfills a mitzvah. You don't make a bracha when unfortunate circumstances take place, that a get has to be given. You don't make a bracha. But if a person breaks off his relationship with his wife, or he wants to break off his relationship with his wife, or the wife wants to, and they're not able to come to some kind of understanding, so then he is prohibited from not giving a get, from holding back a divorce. So this is even though the Torah mentioned in a positive manner, because of lo sefer krisos, he should write a writ of separation, but nevertheless, it's not a mitzvah in the sense of davening and saying Kriya Shema that we make or taking a lulav or an esrog that we make a bracha on it, but it's a isur, a prohibition in withholding. It's a prohibition of withholding a get. So we have three types of mitzvahs. You have the mitzvah written in a negative manner. Don't eat something that's not kosher. Don't do work on Shabbos. Then you have mitzvahs that are in the positive manner. Take a lulav and esrog on Sukkot. Eat in the sukkah on Sukkot. Eat matzah on Pesach. And those are mitzvahs, for the most part, that we make brachas on them. And then there are mitzvahs that the Torah writes it in a positive manner, but it's not a real mitzvah in the sense of fulfilling a mitzvah, but it's just a prohibition in not adapting to a certain approach. So okay, now one of the mitzvahs in this week's Sedra is the mitzvah ma'aka. If a person builds a house, so they are required to build a fence around the roof of their house. Now, it goes without saying, this is only talking about flat roofs, where people are able to stand, to do things and whatever. It seemingly is a protective measure that people shouldn't fall off the roof. So the Torah made a requirement that when you have a flat roof to a house, so you should put a fence around the house. It doesn't apply in all situations. We'll go into some of it a little bit later. And the Torah says, "Kisivne bayis chadash." If you build a new house, you shall make a fence for your roof, so that you will not place blood in your house if a fallen one falls from it. That's to prevent somebody from falling from it. And our sages tell us, so there is a positive commandment. The positive commandment is to build a fence around the roof of one's house, And there is a negative commandment in leaving the roof without a fence around it, but included in that prohibition is anything dangerous that you have on your property that you don't put some form of protection is included in these mitzvos. In other words, let's say if somebody will have a pit that a person could fall in, so he's required to put a cover or a fence around those areas. If somebody has a ladder standing in the house that is very weak, and there's a danger that a person might fall while climbing up that ladder, that is also prohibited. Lo sasim damim veisecha. You should not have in your house something that could lead to the spilling of blood, to death. So one is not allowed to have something that is a form of a hindrance, a michshol, that could result in a catastrophe of a person dying by accident, getting killed by accident. And there's both a positive commandment for this, and there is a negative commandment. The positive commandment is vasisa makala gagecha. You shall make a fence around your roof. And it's clear from the Rambam in Sefer HaMitzvos as well as the Sifri that while it's true about making a fence around the roof is a requirement in vasisa makala gagecha, you shall make a fence around the roof. But included in this is removing any michshol, any hindrance that could result in a person getting killed accidentally. And then there is the prohibition of lo sasim damim beisecha, do not keep anything in your house that could result in a person being accidentally killed. So, and both from the Rambam and the Sefer HaMitzvos and the Sifri, it appears what is true about the prohibition, lo sasim damim beisecha, is true about the positive commandment as well. In other words, the positive commandment is not limited to building a roof around the house, building a fence around the roof of the house. But the positive commandment involves getting rid of anything that is possible to cause an accident in the house. So now the Rambam says, but making a bracha, Rambam says that when you build a roof, you build a fence around the roof of the house, so then you make a bracha on the mitzvah. But let's say if you take a broken ladder out of the house, you don't make a bracha. If you cover up a pit on your property, according to the Rambam, you don't make a bracha. So the question is, if all of these things are included in the mitzvah of building of a sisa makal gagecha, and when you make a fence around the roof of your house, you have to make a bracha. So because by making the roof around the house, you're preventing a person from falling off the roof. So why shouldn't you be required to make a bracha when you remove a broken ladder? Because by removing it, you were preventing people from injuring and killing themselves. So this is one of the questions that we have to understand. Now, it seems that according to the Rambam, the chiyuv, that's why I gave the introduction, the requirement of building a fence that's a positive command. That's a command like eating matzah and Pesach. Whereas having something in the house that is dangerous, that's an Isur Aseh. That's a prohibition. That's a prohibition in having it in the house. So we know we only make brachos when we fulfill a mitzvah, when it's a positive thing. But if it's a negative thing of leaving of not leaving something in the house, removing something from the house, so then there is no bracha. Now, and it's very interesting, and this is a question that many people probably have. The Beis Yosef, the Mabit, the two greatest scholars in Eretz Yisrael in the in the middle 1500s, were the Beis Yosef, the author of the Shulchan Aruch, and the Mabit. They both lived in Sfas. And the Mabit, in his Shelos Teshuvos, he wrote a book with questions of Jewish law that he answered. So he includes there a question that he asked his colleague, Rabbi Yosef Karo, the Beis Yosef, the author of the Shulchan Aruch. And that is, why is it that in Sfas, in those days, where the houses had flat roofs, no one built a fence around the roof? And the Beis Yosef said that the reason we don't have to build a fence around the roof, he says, when was there a requirement to build a fence around the roof where people would sit or would be on their roof for extended periods of time, not just go up for a minute to check something, but it was part of their routine to be on the roof. They used the roof as part of their living experience. But in Sfas, in those days, people did not use the roof in that manner. So consequently, he felt there wasn't the need to build a makkah, to build a fence around the roof. Now, I want to explain this, what the Beis Yosef says. Now, it's interesting. The Rambam says that not every house is required to have a fence around its roof. A house that is less than 4 amos by 4 amos. An amma, according to some opinions, there are many different opinions, but they range, not that there aren't opinions that say more than that, than Siv, I think, says more than that, but the general opinion range from anywhere from 18 inches to 2 feet. So a house that doesn't have 4 amos by 4 amos, let's say if we say it's 2 feet, so the house, it's a small house, but would have to be 8 feet by 8 feet to require a makkah. So the question is asked, why if this mitzvah of building a makkah, of building a fence around the roof, is to prevent the danger of somebody falling from the roof. So why does it apply only to a house that is 4 amos by 4 amos or larger? After all, if for some reason someone lives in a smaller house, there might be the same danger if he goes up on the roof. And and also the Rambam says that, let's say if you have a storage facility, a house that stores grain, that stores wheat, So you do not have to build a fence around the roof. And the question is, if there is a danger that a person could fall, so why shouldn't there be such a requirement? Why should a storage facility be different than a regular house? A person can fall from the roof of the storage facility in the same manner as he could fall from the roof of his house. Now, my uncle discusses it, I should say it's brought down in the notes of his shiurim, and he offers two answers. I'm going to focus on one answer because it's similar to an answer that I had given not years before my uncle said it, but years before I saw what my uncle said. My uncle said that I would not think, he said there's a difference between when you have a pit on your property and that a person could fall in and the roof of a house. He says on the property, people are constantly walking. Is likely because of, he calls it drisas harabim. People are constantly walking on the property. So a person will fall in. He says, but a roof, people don't walk on roofs. So if not for the fact that the Torah required it, I would say a roof doesn't need a fence because the danger is only where people walk. But if people don't walk there, are not constantly walking there, so there isn't a danger. Now, years ago, actually, it was in the summer of 1973. So I was in the Catskills for a short while, and I met my Rabbi from high school, Rabbi Siegel of blessed memory. And I was learning this sugya at that time. I was learning these halachas at that time. And I mentioned to him a similar answer that my uncle gave. I said that when a person is on a roof, he tends to be careful. However, when a person is in his yard, he's not constantly looking what there is. So I would say that it's not considered a danger on the roof. So consequently, I needed the Torah to come to tell me that even on the roof, where a person is constantly on guard, you have to put a fence there. And my Rabbi, Rabbi Siegel, he disagreed with me. He said that a roof, no matter what, represents a very big danger. But whatever it is, this was the answer. This is the answer that I thought, that a roof, a person tends to be careful. And from the Sifri, it seems that even things that are high up, where a person is careful when he walks, certain staircases, the Sifri says do not need a fence because people seem to be careful when they walk up the stairs. People tend to be careful. So a roof, I would have said, a person would be careful. So therefore, the halacha is no. The Torah comes and tells me we have to consider it a danger, even though there's reason to argue that it's not the same type of danger that other places have. Now, however, this presents a problem because once the Torah said that I have to consider it a danger, the question is, why is there a halacha? Why is there a law that when I build the fence around the roof, I have to make a bracha. I'm building the fence around the roof. The Rambam says that any mitzvah that's based on the prevention of danger, so any mitzvah that's based on the prevention of danger, so you don't make a bracha on. So the question is, but we make a bracha when we put a fence around the roof. And if the halacha is that you have to consider it a danger because of its potential danger, so why do we make a bracha on it? A mitzvah that's based on the prevention of danger, we shouldn't make a bracha. So I think so, and to say, well, it's not a law of danger, it's just a law that it requires a fence, doesn't seem so from the pasuk, because the pasuk says that the reason for building the fence is that a person, it's at the end of the pasuk, but it's going on the whole pasuk, a person is likely to fall. So it seems that halachically we consider it, okay, it's not the same danger, but a danger it is. And we don't make a bracha on a mitzvah that's for the prevention of danger. So why do we make a bracha when we may put a wall around the roof? So now I think that we could explain it in the following manner. There is a house, there's a difference between a house and a home. A house is a place I can reside. It has walls. I can sleep there. I can eat there. I can do all kinds of things. But the definition of a house doesn't have so much to do with my manner of living, with my mental attitude regarding living. In other words, the mitzvah of makkah is not just because to prevent danger, because in truth, a person when he's on the roof, he's careful. We're not talking where you have children on the roof. When a person is on the roof, he's very careful. But he's on guard. And when a person is on constant guard, he doesn't have peace of mind. A house, a home, as opposed to a home imbues a person with a certain attitude. He feels safe. He doesn't have to walk being constantly on guard. In other words, a fence has to be put on the roof, not so much to prevent the danger, but to prevent the person from being on guard because of his vulnerability of falling off the roof. In other words, it's the purpose of the fence around the roof is to make the roof as part of the home. If there is no roof there, you can live up there. But you have to constantly be careful. A home shouldn't be a place where a person has to be careful like he's walking on eggshells. And my uncle in the commentary on Chumash, it's taken from other writings of his, he says, we have many laws, and this is very important today. We have many laws pertaining to safety. Our code, the Torah, is replete with them. There are many laws about safety. These laws are rooted in the notion of human exposure to the so-called accidents. And it's interesting, my uncle used the expression so-called accidents. Obviously, no one means to fall off a roof. But why did my uncle call it so-called accidents? Because there are things that the person but I see we don't learn. I see even in our community, even in yeshivas, people are not maintaining social distancing. People are not wearing the masks. We're warned over and over and over again about the dangers that are happening right now. Orthodox doctors who specialize in infectious disease are constantly warning about it. And what they're saying is being ignored. And there were great losses in our community. People died every day. Months ago, every day you looked in the paper, they had special obituaries for those in our community. When I say our community, I'm talking about the Torah community, the yeshiva world. People died. And we take it easy. The halachas is that one should not eat meat and fish together, because at one time that was considered, there's a machlokas whether it still applies, that was considered a health danger. People will not drink orange juice that has some fish oil when they eat meat. What is the rationale to believe that that is a greater danger than going in a crowd without maintaining social distancing, without wearing a mask? And they say even the smallest amount of fish, even if you have 60 times against it, you can't eat it with meat. Chamira sakanta meishura. Look at the inconsistency and the stupidity and the ridiculousness. I'm not saying to eat fish with meat. But if you want to know where there is a greater danger, you have to be a big fool to say that there's less of a danger not to maintain social distancing than to eat fish with meat. Silim b'choshech yahalechu. Chamira sakanta meisura. Reb Chaim, when there was a plague in Brisk, Reb Chaim said even after the plague stopped for a period of time, you have to maintain distancing. They'll quote Reb Chaim about everything else and usually misquote him. But this they ignore. I'm not saying not to open yeshivas. I'm not saying not to go to school. But take a look. Public schools are reopening. At that time, it's interesting. You know, when the plague first started, and the yeshivas remained open for a while, the reason given was, well, if the public schools stay open, initially they did, the yeshivas should stay open also. And now the public schools are reopening, but they're taking all kinds of precautions. Where is the consistency? Did the halacha change? What happened to Chamira Sakata Meisura? That we have to be more careful about safety than about the prohibitions. Anybody that participates in these type of assemblies without maintaining social distancing, without wearing a mask, very likely is violating the prohibition Hishamar lecha shmor nafshecha. And according to way some read the Rambam, that's a prohibition not just in those who participate, but those that enable the participation. According to way some who read the Rambam, if you leave your roof without a fence, or you have a pit and you don't cover it up, so you're violating Hishamar lecha shmor nafshecha. Some say it's just the yaseh vasisa makal gagecha. Whatever it is, it's certainly prohibited. And that's Chamira Sakanta Meisura. It doesn't mean there's no Easter. There's a very big Easter involved. When it first began, we didn't understand the consequences. But now we know the consequences. And Reb Chaim said that time, it was reported in newspapers, they found copies of it. Even after the plague is over, and the plague is not over, even after the plague is over, you have to be careful because it can return. And that was talking about diseases that they knew about. This is a disease that we do not know about. So this is the Torah emphasizes very much the safety. Now, but my uncle writes, he says, this is not just the halacha, the hashkafa wise, from a hashkafa standpoint. The building of a fence around the roof is because of the vulnerability of man. Man might fall off the roof, could fall off the roof. So my uncle said that a person has to build a fence on a spiritual level also. He says not only is the body vulnerable, but the human spirit too is vulnerably exposed. Then we say, Asu siyag l'Torah, make a fence around the Torah. We know that the rabbis added all kinds of prohibitions in order to prevent people from violating mitzvos of the Torah. We stop eating chametz earlier on the day of Erev Pesach. we have to say the Shema at the Shema prayer at the beginning of the night, even though from the Torah perspective we could say it all night, because maybe a person will forget. So you have to say the Shema as early as you can in the nighttime. So there are all kinds of preventive measures. There are fences that we shouldn't fall spiritually as well. In other words, and those are fences that the rabbis created that apply to everybody. But each person is different, and each person has to create his own fences. Each person knows his own weaknesses, or at least each person should know his own weaknesses. So he has to put a fence, a figurative fence around him. Sometimes it's associations that leads him to act improperly. Sometimes it's the Ashrei Ish, the first pasuk of the Hillim, Ashrei Ish asher lo halach b'atzas rishon, who did not go with the advice of the wicked, v'derech hatam lo amad, and in the path of the sinners he did not stand, uv'moshe of Leitzim, and he did not sit together with Leitzim, with scoffers. And the Medrash says, Miri in his Parish in Tehillim brings down a Medrash that if a person is holech batzas rishayim, if he walks with the wicked, so far at the end, he will stand with the sinners. And if he stands with the sinners on the road, then he will sit with the scoffers. It's very strange. I would think a scoffer, it's not good to be a scoffer. A person has to be serious. Shouldn't be a letz. But that's not as bad as being a sinner. It's certainly not as bad as being wicked. So what does it mean? If you follow the wicked, the advice of the wicked, so then you'll stand with sinners. And if you stand with sinners, you'll sit with scoffers. But I think it tells us here about associations, the impact associations that have. In other words, sometimes we want to create relationships with the wicked, but we say, I'll be on guard. I will be careful. I won't spend much time with them. Halach, I will walk. I'll pass them by. It'll be a momentary passing. But then in our mind, we say, they're not wicked. They're just sinners. And our attitude changes, and we stand with them. And then our attitude changes. They're sinners. They're not really sinners. They're scoffers. They're not serious. So I become one with them. So in my mind, there's a change that takes place. A person has to be careful of who he associates and the nature of that association. Of course, we have to be friendly to everybody. There's no question we have to be friendly. But a person has to evaluate. He has to evaluate himself and evaluate others that he is associating with. Person has to put fences around himself. And there are things that a person does that by themselves are not prohibited. But they can lead to a person to do prohibited things. And that varies from person to person. The laws of the Torah are pretty much objective. It's the same laws for everybody. But what could lead one person to do good the exact same thing could lead another person to do bad. Every person is different. And the impact that situations have on the people are different. There has to be a thorough evaluation of the person himself. There can't be one rule for everybody. When you have one rule for everybody, many people fall out. It's not mass production. Teaching Torah can't be done the way machines produce things. Each person has to be taught as an individual. They can be sitting in the class, but they have to be taught as individuals. Now, it's very interesting. We're already in the month of Elul, and Spartan already started saying Slichas. We'll say Slichas a week before Rosh Hashanah. And in the Slichas, we constantly say, Hashem, Hashem, Kel Racham B'chanan. God, God, the name Yud Kei Vav Kei is merciful. And the Gemara asks, the Medrash asks, Chazal asks, why does it say Yud Kei Vav Kei twice, God, God? And the Gemara says, because the name of God, Yud Kei Vav Kei, God, God. God means mercy. So why is it mentioned twice? Because we need mercy before the sin, and we need mercy after the sin. In other words, we need mercy before the sin, because we are held responsible. What does it mean before the sin? What do we need mercy before the sin? We didn't sin. The Mabit asked that question. But I think there's a very simple answer. The answer is we are not only held responsible for the sin that we did, but for putting ourselves in a situation that led us to sin. And it's very interesting. The Mishnah in Pirkei Avos says, before who you're going to give a din, a ruling, cheshbon and accounting. And the Vilna Gaon asked the question, it's to say cheshbon b'din. First you have the accounting and then is the din. And I think first we're going to be held responsible for the sin that we did, for the improper way we acted. But then we're going to be held responsible, that's the cheshbon, the accounting, for how we came to sin. People don't sin just overnight. There is an attitude, there is associations that lead a person to sin. And in that regard, that varies from person to person. When one person tries to imitate the other, it could be, for one person, it could be a catastrophe, and for the other person, it could be salvation. No two people are the same. So if we're standing before the days of the 10 days of tshuva, before the 10 days of tshuva. And we have to know that when we evaluate ourselves, it's not just to evaluate the sins that we did, but it's to evaluate what led us to sin. And that's the Hashem Kel Racham B'chanan. We need Rachman, we need mercy before the sin, mercy for the associations that we had that led us to sin, as well as mercy for the sin that we are trying to return from right now. And there is a famous story, I mentioned it before, and I think it's important for us to realize the bridge, Kalam, was known as a city that, whether it's true or it's not true, for the simplicity of their thinking. They weren't considered the sharpest people on the face of the earth. It could be the whole story is not true, but the story is that the bridge in Chelm broke, and people were falling through the holes of the bridge. And the Zikne, the elders of the city of Chelm, came together to discuss what we should do about this situation. And they decided that because of all the people injured, because of the broken bridge, they should raise the amount of money they're giving to the hospital instead of fixing the bridge. And that is what we're doing. We are like the people of Chelm. We deal with the problem after it happens. When the people fell through the bridge. And we'll call fasts, Tanesim, and everything. Maybe we should take preventive measures, both on a physical level. Not wait to hear time and time again about people who were killed, Rahman al-Islam. People who became permanently injured. And on a spiritual level also, every person has to evaluate themselves and not to focus just on giving money to the hospital to repair themselves, how to do tshuva. Let us take action to prevent us from having the need to find ourselves in a situation that we will have to do tshuva. Of course, everybody has to do tshuva. But if we act in a proper way, that need will become somewhat limited. Okay.
If anyone, excuse me, if anyone has questions, please put them in the chat. What if you have things that are potentially dangerous, but if they're not used correctly? Like you could have sharp knives to cook in the kitchen, but someone could also,
You have to close the drawer.
Okay. So, well,
anything that's a regular part of life, a normal part of life, is not considered to be dangerous, or halachically considered to be dangerous. That's there are accidents that will happen no matter what. I'm not saying there's no such thing as accidents, but there are accidents that are accidents that should have been prevented.
So I mean, if someone would have would decide that for themselves they should own a gun, they would need to have locked in a proper safe. Is that okay, or it's not okay? Or you don't want to. It's too broad of a question, maybe.
No, it's not. It's unfortunately, it's not too broad of a question. Unfortunately, if a person finds themselves in a situation that having a gun is absolutely necessary, but if it's as a result of a cowboy mentality that somehow they think they're less of a person if they don't have a gun, then they shouldn't have the gun. It depends on the situation. Obviously, if you're in a situation where there is real danger, then having a gun is important. But of course, you have to take. My father would never have said this, by the way. You have to take the safety precautions. But a person has to evaluate, and it needs a very thorough evaluation as to the situation where he's in, or is it somehow that they need the gun to give themselves some type of cowboy, they're frustrated, when they were younger, they saw cowboy movies, and they have some frustrations from that. Yeah.
Well, also based on what you said about a normal part of life, let's say in certain parts of Israel, there's much higher gun ownership.
That's right,
So
and
in those
it's absolutely necessary there.
And so in that case, like the children would also know that they're not supposed to, or that
That's correct.
they're
That's
more
correct.
educated
That's
about it.
correct.
So the situation.
That's correct. That's
Okay,
correct.
so we have some other questions, but let me stick on this topic while we're on it. When does the level of Shomer Pesayim Hashem to do potentially dangerous things if everyone does it? When does that come into play, and when does that not come into play? I think you did talk about this a couple months ago, but
yeah, Shomer Psayim Hashem. I was actually thinking of discussing that. Shomer Psayim Hashem applies when it's an accepted rule of life. Now, I don't know that at this time, especially when it's illegal, that we could say that it's Dashubei Rabbim. Gemara says Dashubei Rabbim means a lot of people are doing it. Some people try to give percentages and whatever it is. I think it's accepted. It's accepted, something that's accepted as a normal part of life. So when it's illegal, in places where it's illegal or in places where people are constantly being warned, and when you walk in the streets, I would say most of the people are wearing masks. Certainly when more than one when people are walking together who are not family members. People are wearing masks. So I don't think at this point we could say Dashubei Rabbim. It's not accepted. It's not accepted. It's true, you have crazies that protest without it, and you have some among our group also, but I don't think that's the determining factor. The fact that people get shocked when they see pictures of yeshiva boys piled together without social distancing means it's not Dashubei Rabbim. It's not an accepted thing.
Okay, another question. If we know that a lot of people who have serious problems from corona aren't in good health to begin with, should Rabbanim talk more about the need to have good diet and exercise?
They should ask that question to a doctor. Okay.
Okay.
I don't know if there is a relationship. When I did call an infectious disease doctor, and they felt that fasting it does not hurt. But that might vary from case to case.
But not about fasting, but about having a good diet to begin with, regular.
Okay,
to be in better health to begin with.
I don't know. Well, having a good diet and all that, there we could say Dashubei Rabbim.
Okay.
There we could certainly say Dashubei Rabbim. All right, yeah.
What is a way to look at it of if we would associate with people who aren't on our level, when are we going to worry that they're going to influence us, or when can we be hopeful that we could influence them to become better?
You can see
it's
very clear to see if they're trying to influence you. If they're trying to influence you, then, I'm not saying not to talk to them, but if they're trying to influence you, you have to know that you have to make certain distances. But
maybe the difference is if we choose to associate with them, they're not looking for our influence.
No, sometimes they'll take up the challenge, so to say, Yeah, that's right. If we try to associate, but we have to know very careful at what point they're trying to influence us.
Okay. Someone asked, someone noticed that there's a parallel that Mak and Mezuzah both need something that's 4x4 ammo. So
the Kesef Mishnah points that out because there are halachas brought in the Sifri about places that require a makkah, and the Rambam says it doesn't require a makkah. And the Kesef Mishnah answers because there's a machlokus in regard to mezuzah, and the Rambam identifies one with the other. So according to the Rambam's opinion, anything that doesn't require mezuzah doesn't require makkah. That's what the Kesef Mishnah. Others give other explanations, but that's what the Kesef Mishnah says.
So the question that was here was, is building a makkah a mitzvah of chafza like mezuzah, or is it a mitzvah on the gavra?
It's clearly a mitzvah on the chafza.
Okay. There's something here. It doesn't seem to be a question, so I don't know. I don't know exactly what the question is here about behavioral economists say that if people do something dangerous once and nothing happens, they think that the danger goes down, even though it doesn't.
I'm not an economist. I don't know.
So, I don't know. And then one question. This is not for immediate, but so I don't see any more questions on the share. But with Yontif, at least for us here, being if Mashiach doesn't come, it's going to be on Sundays. Will we perhaps move the share to a weeknight or something? So
we'll discuss it. We'll discuss it.
Okay.
We'll discuss it. Okay. I'm more than willing to move it during the Yontif season.
So here's a good question. Can you say Dashu Bei Rabim if people don't wear seatbelts or other dangerous things? Well, yeah, it was mentioned about smoking years ago. And seatbelts may have changed also.
Dr. Kennisburg years ago asked Shaila, my father, in regard to seatbelts. And at that time, my father said that at that time the law was, I don't know what the law is today, at that time the law was that the law was that if you sit in the front, you have to have a seatbelt. But if you sit in the back, so you don't have to have a seatbelt. So my father said that if it's illegal, you couldn't say Dashu Bei Rabim. I assume the explanation is because it's not something that's accepted. If it's illegal, it's not something that's accepted. So consequently, in the front, he said you certainly need the seatbelt. In the back, he said it would be a good idea to use the seatbelt.
Actually, an interesting twist on that nowadays with cannabis becoming legalized. Just because it's legalized doesn't mean that it's Dashu Bei Rabim or something that's socially accepted.
My father, there is a tshuva that was printed by the OU. That since that time, many rabbis have used my father's tshuva. It was an OU put out a correspondence. The NCSY years ago about smoking marijuana. At that time it was called marijuana. So whether it would be allowed, putting aside the illegalities that are involved and the health issues that are involved. And at that time, but that would require a whole share in itself. They received answers from Moshe Feinstein, my father, and Rabbi Jacobowitz, who was the chief rabbi of England at the time. And all three, for different reasons, said that using marijuana was prohibited. And it was independent of the question of health and independent of the question of illegalities. So
Okay.
maybe I'll give a share on that. It might be in my father's book.
There's something about new morality and drugs.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, that's
in that piece. He
wait,
discussed.
It actually may not be in the book.
I think it is. I know someone tampered with that article, so it might have been taken out.
It might be in the Tradition journal.
Yeah, it could be.
It's not in. It's
No,
not in Logic of the Heart.
Not in the Tradition journal. Okay, so, but it was put out by NCSY. They probably haven't.
Okay, so someone's following up. He's not happy with your answer that diet and exercise is important. It shouldn't be you shouldn't be able to say Dashu Be'Rabim if the doctors are saying that you're more likely to have complications from corona if you're not in good physical shape.
It could be that he's right. I didn't hear from the doctors about that. I'm not going to comment about something that I didn't hear from the doctors about.
Okay. So thank you very much. God willing, next week, same time, same Zoom link. I want to say from our Kester Marav, our show perspective, I want to thank Jeff Zaretsky for sponsoring our programming at our show this week for the arts of his grandmother. And thank everyone for joining. And we'll see you next week.
Okay. Okay. Everything should go well.
Amen.